The greatest war you will ever fight is the war between who you are and who you could become.
The real enemy was never outside you. Most people spend their entire life fighting the wrong battle. They blame other people, bad luck, the economy, their circumstances, their past. But eventually, a painful truth appears. The real enemy was never outside you. It was you. Let's slow this down. There are two versions of you living inside your mind right now. One version wants growth, discipline, peace, confidence, greatness, transformation. And the other version wants comfort, distraction, excuses, procrastination, emotional escape, easy pleasure. And every single day, those two versions fight for control over your future. That is the real war. Not you versus the world. You versus you. Another truth. Most people never become who they could have been. Not because they lacked talent, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they kept losing the internal battle. The battle against laziness, against fear, against inconsistency, against self-doubt, against emotional weakness, against comfort. That battle destroys more dreams than failure ever will. Another layer. There are people listening to this right now who know exactly what they should be doing. They know they should be more disciplined. They should stop wasting time. They should take care of their body. They should focus on their future. They should stop procrastinating. They should stop abandoning themselves. They know. But knowing is not transformation. Execution is. And execution becomes difficult when you are fighting yourself internally every day. Another truth. Self-sabotage is dangerous because it happens quietly. Nobody notices it immediately. It happens when you delay important work, when you choose comfort over growth, when you break promises to yourself, when you keep waiting for motivation, when you repeatedly ignore your potential. And slowly, your habits begin shaping an identity you never intended to become. Another layer. The scariest thing in life is not failure. It is becoming someone you no longer respect. Someone who keeps making excuses, keeps quitting, keeps procrastinating, keeps wasting time, keeps betraying their future self. That internal disappointment destroys people psychologically, because deep down, most people know when they are becoming weaker versions of themselves. Another truth. The hardest person to defeat is often yourself, because your mind knows your fears, your weaknesses, your insecurities, your emotional triggers, your excuses. That is why internal battles feel exhausting. You are fighting the version of yourself that wants to stay comfortable. Another layer. Comfort is seductive. Comfort whispers, start tomorrow. Rest a little longer. You still have time. One more distraction won't hurt. You deserve to avoid stress. And slowly, comfort steals discipline, momentum, confidence, self-respect, potential, without people realizing it. Another truth. Every habit is a vote for the person you are becoming. Every decision matters. Every day you procrastinate, avoid growth, surrender to distraction, abandon discipline, you strengthen the weaker version of yourself. And every day you stay focused, remain disciplined, continue despite discomfort, keep promises to yourself. You strengthen the stronger version. That repetition creates identity. Another layer. Most people are not destroyed in one dramatic moment. They are destroyed slowly, quietly, through repeated self-betrayal, betraying their goals, their standards, their future, their potential, until eventually they no longer recognize who they became. Another truth. You cannot build a powerful life while constantly escaping discomfort, because growth requires discipline, sacrifice, emotional control, consistency, and weak versions of you hate those things. That is why the battle feels internal. Another layer. There are moments where your future self is begging you internally, please stop wasting our life. But comfort keeps interrupting. Distraction keeps interrupting. Fear keeps interrupting. And every day, the war continues.
Another truth. Most people think confidence comes first. Not true. Confidence is built after you repeatedly defeat weaker habits. After you stop procrastinating. Stop making excuses. Stop emotionally collapsing under pressure. Stop abandoning your standards. That process creates self-trust. And self-trust creates confidence. Another layer. There is something painful about realizing nobody is truly stopping you except you. Not your circumstances, not your fears, not your past. You. Your habits, your mindset, your decisions. That realization hurts, but it also creates power, because now you can finally change. Another truth. The strongest people are not people without weakness. They are people who stopped letting weakness control them completely. That difference changes everything. Because emotionally strong people understand discipline is self-respect. Another layer. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you strengthen your identity. And every time you betray yourself, you weaken it. That is why small actions matter psychologically.
Because repeated behavior becomes personality. Another truth. The future version of you is watching your decisions right now, watching what you tolerate, what you repeat, what you prioritize, what you avoid. And one day, that future version of you will either thank you or resent you for the standards you chose today. Another layer. Most people wait for motivation before changing, but motivation is temporary. Emotion is temporary. Strong people build systems, standards, habits, because systems survive emotional chaos better than feelings do. Another truth. You become dangerous the moment you stop negotiating with weakness. The moment you decide, I refuse to keep becoming the version of myself that destroys my future. That decision changes identity. Another layer. There are people listening to this right now who are tired of disappointing themselves, tired of restarting, procrastinating, wasting time, lacking consistency, feeling stuck internally. And maybe they are finally realizing the battle was never external. It was internal. Another truth. Your mind can become your greatest weapon or your greatest prison. Because thoughts shape emotions, habits, behavior, identity. That is why mindset matters so deeply. Another layer. Weak habits feel harmless in the moment. Scrolling, delaying, avoiding discomfort.
Choosing easy pleasure repeatedly, but repeated weakness compounds, and eventually, small habits create broken identities. Another truth. You do not rise to your goals. You fall to your habits. That is why habits matter more than motivation,
Because habits determine your discipline, your consistency, your future. Another layer. The strongest transformations happen quietly, not loudly, quietly. When people finally decide to stop lying to themselves, to stop avoiding responsibility, to stop feeding weak habits, to stop betraying their future, that honesty creates power. Another truth. There is a version of you that could completely change your life. A version that is disciplined, focused, emotionally strong, mentally calm, consistent, respected. But that version of you has conditions. It only appears if you win the internal war. Another layer. Most people want success, but still protect the habits destroying success. Protecting distraction, comfort, emotional weakness, inconsistency. That contradiction destroys growth. Another truth. You cannot become extraordinary while remaining addicted to comfort. Comfort weakens urgency, weakens discipline, weakens hunger. And over time, comfort quietly destroys potential. Another layer? The war inside your mind never fully disappears. Every day, you must choose. Discipline or distraction. Growth or comfort. Responsibility or excuses. Focus or emotional escape. That daily choice shapes destiny. Another truth? The strongest people alive today are often people who mastered themselves. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to control impulses, to protect discipline, to stay focused under pressure, to continue despite emotion. That self-control creates power. Another layer? One decision can change your entire life. The decision to stop becoming your own worst enemy. To stop sabotaging yourself, delaying growth, abandoning your standards, feeding weakness.
And finally, choose transformation instead. Another truth? Nobody can fight this battle for you. Nobody can build your discipline, fix your habits, strengthen your mindset, save your future. That responsibility belongs to you. And while that truth feels heavy, it is also freeing, because it means you still have power to change. Another layer? The strongest version of you is waiting on the other side of discipline. Waiting on the other side of emotional control, consistency, responsibility, self-respect. But first, you must defeat the version of yourself that keeps destroying your future. Another truth? Most people are one disciplined year away from becoming unrecognizable. But they never stay consistent long enough, because comfort keeps winning the war. Another layer? You are becoming someone every single day. The question is, are you becoming someone your future will respect, or someone your future will regret? Because time keeps moving either way. Another truth? The greatest battle of your life will not happen publicly. It will happen privately, inside your mind, in moments where nobody is watching, nobody is forcing you, nobody is saving you. And you must decide who controls your future. Another layer? One day, you will meet the person your habits created. The question is, will that person make you proud or break your heart? There is one final truth before this audiobook begins.
The real enemy was never outside you. The real battle was always you versus you.
Chapter 1. The War Inside Your Mind. Every single day, a battle is happening inside you. A silent war. A war nobody else can fully see. Not a war with other people. Not a war with the world. A war between discipline and comfort. Growth and distraction. Focus and excuses. The person you are and the person you could become. That is the real battle. You versus you. Let's slow this down. Most people think their biggest obstacle is external. They think success is blocked by circumstances. Happiness is blocked by other people. Growth is blocked by bad luck. But eventually, a painful realization appears. The greatest obstacle is often internal. Because many people are not destroyed by enemies. They are destroyed by procrastination, inconsistency, emotional weakness, self-doubt, distraction, comfort addiction. That internal destruction happens quietly. Another truth: the human mind is powerful, but undisciplined, it becomes dangerous. Because your mind can either build your future or sabotage your future, repeatedly. Another layer: there are two voices living inside you right now. One voice says, stay disciplined, keep going, protect your future, become stronger, stop wasting your life. And the other voice whispers, rest a little longer. You can start tomorrow. This is too hard. One distraction won't matter. Comfort is enough. And every day, one of those voices becomes stronger, based on what you repeatedly choose. Another truth: most people underestimate how dangerous self-sabotage becomes over time. Because weak habits feel harmless initially. Skipping one workout, delaying one task, choosing distraction one more time, breaking promises to yourself repeatedly. Those moments seem small, but repeated weakness compounds. And eventually, small habits create painful identities. Another layer: there are people listening to this right now who are exhausted from fighting themselves internally. They know what they should be doing. They know they should focus more. They should stop procrastinating. They should become disciplined. They should protect their mental health. They should stop wasting time. They know. But knowing is not transformation. Action is. And action becomes difficult when your own mind constantly works against your future. Another truth: the most dangerous enemy is the one that lives inside your head. Because your mind knows your insecurities, your fears, your emotional triggers, your weaknesses, your excuses. That is why internal battles feel exhausting. You cannot run from yourself. Another layer: many people are trapped in cycles of self-betrayal. They promise themselves, tomorrow I'll change. Tomorrow I'll become disciplined. Tomorrow I'll focus. Tomorrow I'll stop wasting time. But tomorrow keeps moving. And eventually, repeated self-betrayal destroys self-trust. That is why confidence disappears for many people. Because confidence is built through kept promises, not empty intentions. Another truth: every time you abandon your standards, your mind notices. Every time you quit too early, avoid discomfort, procrastinate, surrender to distraction,
your identity weakens slightly. And every time you stay disciplined, continue despite discomfort, protect your focus, keep promises to yourself, your identity strengthens. That repetition shapes self-respect.
The war inside your mind is deeply psychological because your brain naturally seeks comfort, easy pleasure, low resistance, instant gratification. That is why distraction feels seductive. Scrolling feels easier than discipline. Comfort feels easier than growth. Temporary pleasure feels easier than long-term transformation. Another truth: weakness grows through repetition, too. This matters deeply. Every time you repeatedly choose comfort, avoidance, emotional escape, laziness, you train your mind to become weaker. That conditioning affects identity. Another layer: there is something painful about realizing you are capable of more, but keep standing in your own way. That realization hurts, because deep down, most people know when they are wasting their potential. Another truth: self-sabotage rarely looks dramatic. It looks ordinary. It looks like wasting hours online, delaying important work, lacking consistency, choosing comfort repeatedly, emotionally avoiding responsibility. And slowly, average habits create average lives. Another layer: many people are addicted to distraction, not because distraction fulfills them, because distraction temporarily helps them avoid pressure, fear, responsibility, self-confrontation. That avoidance becomes psychological escape. Another truth: your mind becomes stronger when you stop feeding weakness constantly, because discipline is mental training. Every disciplined action teaches your brain, I control my behavior. That lesson creates emotional power. Another layer: the strongest people are not people without temptation. They are people who learned how to control themselves despite temptation. That distinction changes everything, because self-control creates freedom. Another truth: most people wait for motivation before taking action. But motivation is unreliable. Some days you feel inspired. Some days you feel emotionally exhausted. If your future depends entirely on emotion, consistency disappears. That is why discipline matters more than motivation. Another layer: discipline is the ability to protect your future from your temporary feelings. That ability creates powerful people, because now you stop making decisions entirely based on mood. Another truth: there are moments where your future self is begging you internally, please stop destroying our potential. But comfort keeps interrupting. Distraction keeps interrupting. Weak habits keep interrupting. And every day, the internal war continues. Most people believe big decisions shape destiny. Sometimes, small, repeated decisions matter more, because identity is built through repetition. Repeated habits, thoughts, behaviors, standards. That repetition creates personality. Another truth: your habits are not small. Your habits are building someone. Every day, you are becoming stronger or weaker, more disciplined or more distracted, more focused or more emotionally unstable. That process never stops. Another layer:
There is something dangerous about a person who masters their own mind. Because now, they stop becoming controlled by impulse, distraction, emotional weakness, comfort addiction. And self-mastery creates extraordinary advantage. Another truth: the war inside your mind determines your consistency, your discipline, your future, your identity. That is why mindset matters so deeply. Because thoughts shape actions.
And actions shape destiny. Another layer? Most people want success, but still protect the habits destroying success. That contradiction keeps them trapped. They want transformation, but remain emotionally loyal to comfort. Another truth? You cannot become extraordinary while negotiating constantly with weakness. Weakness must be confronted, not fed. Another layer? The strongest transformations happen privately, quietly, when people finally become honest with themselves. Honest about their habits, their excuses, their distractions, their emotional weakness. That honesty creates power. Another truth? There is a version of you that could completely transform your life. A version that wakes up disciplined, keeps promises to itself, remains focused, protects its future, controls its emotions, respects itself deeply. But that version requires sacrifice. It requires consistency, discipline, emotional control, discomfort tolerance. And weak versions of you resist those things constantly. Another layer. Most people do not fail because they are incapable. They fail because they never fully defeat procrastination, inconsistency, distraction, emotional weakness. Those internal enemies destroy potential quietly. Another truth. You become what you repeatedly tolerate. If you tolerate laziness, excuses, weak habits, emotional inconsistency, your identity reflects those things eventually. But if you tolerate discipline, growth, responsibility, discomfort, your identity evolves differently. Another layer. There are moments where your life changes, not because circumstances changed, but because your standards changed. The moment you decide, I refuse to keep becoming the weaker version of myself, that decision creates transformation. Another truth. Self-respect is built through self-control, because every disciplined action sends a message internally. I can trust myself, and trust creates confidence. Another layer. The strongest people alive today are often people who learned how to win the battle inside their own mind. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to stay focused. To remain disciplined. To continue despite emotion. To resist self-destruction. That ability creates powerful lives. Another truth? Most people are one disciplined year away from becoming completely different people. But they never stay consistent long enough because comfort keeps winning the war. Another layer? Comfort is dangerous because it feels safe. But comfort often steals urgency, discipline, momentum, growth, without people realizing it. Another truth? The war inside your mind never fully disappears. Every day, you must choose growth or comfort,
focus or distraction, discipline or excuses, responsibility or emotional escape. Those choices shape identity. Another layer, you do not become mentally strong accidentally. Mental strength is trained, built through resisting weakness, controlling impulses, staying disciplined under pressure, continuing despite discomfort. That repetition creates resilience. One day, you will meet the person your habits created. The question is, will that person make you proud or break your heart? Because your daily decisions are shaping that future version right now. Another layer? There is something psychologically freeing about realizing the battle is internal. Because now, you stop waiting for the world to change first and begin rebuilding yourself instead. Another truth? You are not powerless. You are not trapped permanently. But transformation requires responsibility. Because nobody can build your discipline, control your habits, strengthen your mindset, save your future. That responsibility belongs to you. Another layer? The strongest version of you is hidden behind discipline, emotional control, consistency, self-respect. But first, you must defeat the version of yourself that keeps destroying your future. Another truth, the greatest battle of your life will happen privately, inside your mind, during moments where nobody is forcing you, nobody is watching you, nobody is saving you, and you must decide who controls your future. There is one final truth in this chapter. The war inside your mind is shaping your destiny every single day. Because eventually, either discipline wins or weakness wins. Either your future self grows stronger or your weaker habits take control. And the people who ultimately transform their lives are usually the people who learned how to finally defeat themselves.
Chapter 2. Comfort is destroying your potential. Most people are not destroyed by failure. They are destroyed by comfort. Slowly, quietly. Comfort destroys people in ways that are difficult to notice at first. Because comfort does not look dangerous. It feels safe, easy, pleasurable, relaxing. And that is exactly why it becomes deadly. Let's slow this down. There is a version of you that could completely transform your life. A version that is disciplined, focused, emotionally strong, respected, mentally sharp, consistent. But that version of you cannot exist while comfort controls your decisions. That is the painful truth most people avoid. Another truth. Comfort is addictive because comfort gives immediate emotional relief. Relief from pressure, responsibility, discipline, discomfort, growth. And the human mind naturally seeks relief. That is why weak habits feel so tempting. Another layer. There are people listening to this right now who know they are capable of more. Deep down, they know they are wasting time. They are delaying growth. They are becoming distracted versions of themselves. But comfort keeps pulling them backward. And slowly, potential begins dying quietly. Another truth? Comfort whispers dangerous lies. It whispers, you still have time. Start tomorrow. Rest a little longer. One more distraction won't hurt. You deserve easy pleasure. And eventually, those small lies become identity.
Another layer, most people do not ruin their future dramatically. They ruin it gradually, through repeated comfort addiction, choosing entertainment over growth, distraction over focus, convenience over discipline, emotional escape over responsibility. Those choices compound over time. Another truth, the dangerous thing about comfort is that it feels harmless in the moment. Scrolling for hours feels harmless. Procrastination feels harmless. Avoiding discomfort feels harmless. But repeated weakness compounds psychologically. And eventually, weak habits create weak identities. Another layer, there is something painful about realizing your biggest obstacle is not lack of opportunity. It is lack of discipline. That realization hurts the ego, because now you must confront yourself honestly. Another truth, comfort weakens urgency. And without urgency, potential fades. Because growth requires movement, effort, sacrifice, discomfort tolerance. Comfort resists all of those things. Another layer, the strongest people alive today are often people who became uncomfortable with comfort. They stopped needing easy pleasure constantly, stopped needing endless distraction constantly, stopped running from difficulty constantly. That shift changed their lives.
Comfort creates emotional weakness because comfort trains the mind to avoid resistance. And a mind trained to avoid resistance struggles under pressure. That is why emotionally fragile people often collapse during difficult seasons. They never train themselves for discomfort. Another layer. Discomfort builds strength. This matters deeply because every time you resist distraction, stay disciplined, continue under pressure, delay gratification, you strengthen your mind. That repetition creates resilience. Another truth. Most people want transformation, but still protect the habits destroying transformation. They want confidence, discipline, success, peace, but still choose comfort, laziness, inconsistency, emotional escape. That contradiction keeps them trapped. Another layer. Comfort becomes dangerous when it replaces purpose. When people stop chasing growth and begin chasing only ease, that mentality slowly destroys ambition. Another truth. There are people whose entire life became smaller because comfort convinced them average is enough. And slowly, their dreams disappeared. Their urgency disappeared. Their discipline disappeared. That is tragic. Another layer. The war between comfort and growth happens every single day, every morning, every decision, every habit. Every moment where you choose discipline or distraction, responsibility or escape, focus or emotional comfort. That war shapes destiny. Another truth, most people overestimate what comfort gives them and underestimate what comfort steals from them. Comfort steals hunger, focus, urgency, resilience, emotional strength, without people noticing immediately. Another layer, there is something dangerous about becoming addicted to easy dopamine, easy stimulation, easy pleasure, easy distraction. Because now, your brain begins rejecting anything difficult. And growth always requires difficulty. Another truth, discipline feels difficult initially, but regret feels worse long term. That is what many people realize too late. Another layer, there are people listening to this right now
who are tired of restarting, tired of procrastinating, tired of wasting time, tired of disappointing themselves. And deep down, they know comfort is winning the internal war.
Comfort destroys self-respect slowly. Because every time you choose weakness over discipline, your mind notices. And repeated self-betrayal weakens identity. Another layer. Confidence is not built through comfort. Confidence is built through discipline, consistency, kept promises, difficult actions repeated daily. That process creates self-trust. Another truth. Most people want the rewards of discipline without the discomfort discipline requires. Impossible. Because discipline demands sacrifice. Sacrifice of easy pleasure, emotional excuses, distraction, laziness. That sacrifice creates growth. Another layer. The strongest people learn how to function without needing constant comfort. That ability creates emotional freedom. Because now, their behavior stops depending entirely on mood. Another truth. Comfort delays greatness. This matters deeply. Because every year spent avoiding growth is a year your potential stays undeveloped. And wasted years never fully return. Another layer. Many people are trapped in cycles of easy pleasure. Scrolling, avoiding responsibility, escaping through distraction. And eventually, their attention span weakens, their discipline weakens, their identity weakens. That pattern destroys futures quietly. Another truth. You cannot build an extraordinary life with ordinary discipline. And comfort destroys discipline. That is why comfortable people often remain stuck. Another layer. Discomfort creates expansion. Every difficult thing you survive strengthens your mind, increases your confidence, builds emotional endurance. That process creates resilience. Another truth. Most people wait until pain forces them to change. But wise people change before destruction arrives. That awareness creates advantage. Another layer. Comfort is seductive because it gives temporary relief. But temporary relief often creates permanent regret. That is the hidden cost of weakness. Another truth. There is something psychologically powerful about becoming the type of person who chooses growth over comfort consistently. Because now you begin building self-respect, resilience, emotional strength, discipline. That identity changes everything. Weak habits always promise immediate pleasure, but strong habits create long-term freedom. That distinction matters deeply because your future depends on what you repeatedly practice. Another truth? Comfort is not evil, but addiction to comfort destroys potential. Because potential only grows through challenge, effort, discomfort, responsibility. That is how transformation happens. Another layer. The strongest people often become obsessed with discipline. Not because discipline feels exciting every day, because discipline protects their future. That mindset creates powerful lives. Another truth. Your future self is watching your habits right now. Watching what you tolerate, what you repeat, what controls your attention, whether comfort keeps defeating you. And one day, that future version of you will either respect your discipline or suffer from your weakness. Another layer. There are moments where growth feels lonely, because disciplined people often move differently from comfortable people.
They think differently, prioritize differently, sacrifice differently. That separation creates different futures. Another truth. Most people are one uncomfortable decision away from changing their life. But comfort keeps delaying transformation. Another layer. You become stronger every time you choose. Discipline over distraction.
Focus over entertainment. Responsibility over excuses. Those small victories build identity. Another truth: comfort is temporary, but the consequences of comfort addiction can last for years. That is why self-control matters so deeply. Another layer: the strongest transformations happen when people become tired of their own weakness, tired of procrastinating, restarting, wasting time, lacking discipline, betraying themselves. That frustration creates urgency, and urgency creates movement. Another truth: discipline is not punishment. Discipline is protection. Protection from wasted potential, from future regret, from emotional weakness, from becoming someone you no longer respect. That is why discipline matters. Another layer: most people fear discomfort, but discomfort is often the doorway to growth, the doorway to confidence, emotional strength, self-respect, transformation. Without discomfort, those things rarely develop deeply. Another truth: comfort makes people emotionally soft, and emotionally soft people struggle when life becomes difficult. That is why resilience matters, because life eventually pressures everyone. The strongest people train themselves to tolerate discomfort without collapsing emotionally. That ability creates extraordinary advantage, because now pressure stops controlling them completely. Another truth: you cannot become powerful while remaining addicted to easy living, because greatness demands sacrifice, focus, consistency, emotional control. Comfort resists all of those things. Another layer. One disciplined year can completely rebuild your identity, rebuild confidence, focus, habits, momentum, self-respect. That is the power of choosing growth over comfort repeatedly. Another truth: most people do not need more motivation. They need stronger standards, because standards survive emotional weakness better than feelings do. Another layer. There is a version of you that your current habits will never allow you to meet. A stronger version, a disciplined version, a focused version. But to meet that person, you must stop feeding comfort constantly. Another truth: the life you want often exists behind the discomfort you keep avoiding. That is why courage matters, because transformation requires confrontation. Another layer. Every day, comfort asks, why suffer? But your future asks, why stay weak? And eventually, one of those voices will control your destiny. There is one final truth in this chapter. Comfort is destroying your potential. Not loudly, quietly, through distraction, procrastination, emotional escape, repeated weakness. And the people who ultimately transform their lives are usually the people who finally decided, I refuse to let comfort destroy who I could become. Chapter 3. You keep betraying your future self. One of the saddest things in life
is not failure. It is self-betrayal. The slow betrayal of the person you could have become. Because deep down, most people already know what they should stop doing, what they should start doing, what habits are destroying them, what future they truly want. They know. But every day, they choose against themselves. And slowly, their future begins collapsing quietly. Let's slow this down. There is a future version of you, watching your decisions right now. Watching your habits, your discipline, your excuses, your consistency, what you tolerate, how you spend your time. And one day, that future version of you will either thank you or resent you for the choices you repeatedly made. Most people betray themselves gradually, not dramatically, through procrastination, distraction, laziness, emotional inconsistency, abandoning discipline, choosing comfort repeatedly. And because the damage happens slowly, they do not realize what they are becoming until years pass. There are people listening to this right now who feel disappointed in themselves internally. Not because they are incapable, but because they know they are becoming less than they could be. That internal disappointment is painful because self-betrayal destroys self-respect. Every promise you break to yourself weakens your identity slightly. Every time you say, "I'll start tomorrow. I'll stay disciplined. I'll focus. I'll stop wasting time," and then fail yourself again, your mind notices. That repetition destroys trust internally. Confidence is not built through positive thinking alone. Confidence is built through self-trust. And self-trust is built when your actions align with your words. That alignment creates internal peace. Many people are trapped in cycles of restarting. Starting, stopping, restarting, quitting, promising, failing themselves again. And eventually, they stop believing their own words. That psychological damage is deeper than people realize. Self-betrayal creates emotional exhaustion because carrying the weight of unrealized potential hurts internally.
Especially when deep down, you know, you are capable of more. The future version of you is shaped by your daily decisions, not your intentions, not your wishes, your repeated behavior. That is why habits matter more than motivation. Because habits build identity. Most people sabotage their future for temporary comfort, trading long-term growth for short-term pleasure, trading discipline for distraction, trading focus for emotional escape. And slowly, temporary comfort creates permanent regret. There is something painful about watching yourself waste your own potential. Watching yourself procrastinate, avoid growth, abandon discipline, repeat weak habits, while knowing you could become more. That internal conflict destroys peace. Your future self remembers every excuse you make today. Every moment where you chose comfort, you delayed growth, you abandoned your standards, you wasted another day. Those moments compound.
Most people think they have unlimited time, but years disappear quickly. And one day, people wake up shocked by how much life they wasted. Scrolling, avoiding responsibility, delaying discipline, living emotionally weak. That realization destroys people psychologically. The strongest people become protective of their future, protective of their time, their attention, their discipline, their habits, their mental health. Because they understand their future depends on what they repeatedly tolerate. You become dangerous the moment you stop betraying yourself, the moment your actions finally align with your goals. Because now, momentum begins building, and momentum changes identity. There are moments where your future self is begging you internally, please stop destroying our life. Begging you to focus, to become disciplined, to stop wasting time, to stop feeding weak habits, to stop running from responsibility. But comfort keeps interrupting. Every day you delay growth, the stronger your weaker habits become. This matters deeply because repeated weakness trains identity too. You train yourself to procrastinate, to avoid discomfort, to abandon consistency, to escape emotionally. That conditioning becomes dangerous. Most people do not realize they are practicing failure daily, practicing inconsistency, distraction, emotional weakness, laziness, and practice creates identity. Your future is not built suddenly. It is built through repeated daily behavior. That is why small actions matter psychologically, because repeated actions become personality. Self-betrayal destroys ambition slowly, because every broken promise weakens confidence, momentum, emotional energy, self-belief, and eventually, people stop expecting greatness from themselves. That is tragic. The strongest transformations happen when people become tired of disappointing themselves, tired of restarting, procrastinating, lacking discipline, abandoning their standards. That frustration creates urgency, and urgency creates change. Most people want better lives, but refuse to become better versions of themselves. Impossible, because external growth follows internal growth. You cannot build a powerful future while repeatedly choosing weak habits, because weak habits create weak identities, and weak identities struggle under pressure. There are two versions of you fighting daily. One version wants discipline, focus, growth, emotional strength, transformation. The other version wants comfort, distraction, easy pleasure, emotional escape. And whichever version you feed repeatedly becomes stronger. Every time you stay disciplined, you vote for your future self. Every time you wake up anyway, focus anyway, continue anyway, resist distraction anyway, you strengthen your identity. That repetition creates self-respect. Most people underestimate how much time they waste emotionally, wasting attention, focus, mental energy, emotional discipline. And eventually, they realize their biggest enemy was not lack of opportunity. It was lack of control over themselves. Self-control creates freedom. Because when you control your habits, your attention, your impulses, your emotions. You stop becoming controlled by weakness. That creates power. There is something psychologically freeing about finally becoming honest with yourself. Honest about your distractions, your excuses, your inconsistency, your self-sabotage. Because honesty creates responsibility, and responsibility creates transformation. The strongest people are not perfect people. They are people who stopped tolerating self-betrayal. That distinction changes everything, because discipline becomes identity. Many people spend years waiting to feel ready, to feel motivated, to feel inspired. But transformation begins when you act despite emotion.
That ability creates mentally strong individuals. Your future self does not need perfection from you, but it does need consistency, repeated effort, repeated discipline, repeated self-respect. That repetition creates growth. One disciplined year can completely change your confidence, your habits, your mindset, your future, but only if you stop betraying yourself repeatedly. Most people are capable of extraordinary things, but capability means nothing without execution. Potential without discipline becomes regret. That is why action matters more than intention. The strongest people learn how to protect themselves from themselves. Protecting themselves from laziness, distraction, emotional weakness, procrastination. That self-awareness creates advantage. You become emotionally stronger every time you choose responsibility over excuses, discipline over comfort, focus over distraction. Those small victories build identity. The future version of you is either being built or destroyed by your current habits. That process never stops. Every day matters. You cannot fully respect yourself if you continuously abandon your own standards. Self-respect requires alignment between words, actions, discipline, identity. That alignment creates confidence. There are moments where your life changes forever. Not because motivation appeared, but because you finally became tired of your own excuses. That exhaustion creates transformation. The strongest version of you is hidden behind consistency, hidden behind discipline, emotional control, repeated action, self-respect. But weak habits keep blocking access to that version. Most people are one decision away from changing their life. The decision to stop betraying themselves, to stop wasting time, avoiding growth, abandoning discipline, feeding weakness, and finally, choose alignment instead. Your habits are introducing you to your future self every single day. The question is, will that future self respect you or resent you? Because your current choices are shaping that answer right now.
One day, you will either thank yourself for becoming disciplined or mourn the version of yourself you never became. There is one final truth in this chapter. You keep betraying your future self every time you choose comfort over growth, distraction over focus, excuses over responsibility. And the people who ultimately transform their lives are usually the people who finally decided, I refuse to keep becoming my own worst enemy.
Chapter 4.
Discipline versus distraction. Your future is being stolen quietly. Not always by failure, not always by bad luck, but by distraction. Small distractions, daily distractions, constant distractions. And most people do not realize how dangerous distraction becomes until years of their life disappear. Let's slow this down. We live in a world fighting for your attention. Everything wants your focus, your time, your energy, your discipline, your mind. And if you do not learn how to protect your attention, you will spend your life building nothing. Distraction feels harmless. That is why it becomes dangerous. Scrolling for just a few minutes, avoiding difficult work temporarily, escaping into entertainment repeatedly. Those moments seem small, but repeated distraction destroys momentum. And momentum shapes destiny. There are people listening to this right now who feel mentally exhausted constantly, not because they are physically weak, but because their attention is fragmented, pulled in too many directions. Too many notifications, distractions, emotional escapes.
Meaningless stimulation. And slowly, their focus weakens. Attention is power. Where your attention goes, your life follows. Because attention shapes habits, priorities, discipline, identity. That is why distracted people struggle to build powerful lives. Most people think they lack motivation. Often, they lack focus. Because distraction weakens emotional energy, weakens discipline, weakens consistency, and eventually, weakens identity. Distraction is emotional escape. People distract themselves to avoid discomfort, pressure, boredom, uncertainty, self-confrontation. That avoidance becomes addictive. There are moments where your future requires deep focus, but distraction keeps interrupting growth, interrupting discipline, learning, consistency, emotional stability. And slowly, the weaker version of you becomes stronger. Every distraction has a hidden cost. The cost of lost focus, lost time, lost momentum, lost growth, lost potential. That cost compounds over years. The strongest people become extremely protective of their attention because they understand focus is life force. And whatever controls your focus eventually controls your future. Most people cannot sit alone with their thoughts anymore. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels uncomfortable. So they constantly consume stimulation. Scrolling, entertainment, noise, distraction. And eventually, their mind loses the ability to focus deeply. That is dangerous. Discipline requires attention control, the ability to stay focused, to resist distraction, to continue despite boredom, to protect your mental energy. That ability creates extraordinary advantage. Weak people chase stimulation constantly. Strong people learn how to tolerate boredom. That distinction matters deeply. Because greatness is often built during repetitive work, quiet consistency, disciplined focus. And distracted minds struggle with repetition. Most people sabotage themselves without realizing it. Not through dramatic mistakes, through constant distraction, wasting hours, focus, emotional energy, attention span, every single day. You become what repeatedly captures your attention.
This matters deeply. If your attention is constantly consumed by entertainment, gossip, distraction, emotional chaos, your identity reflects those things eventually. The strongest transformations happen in focused seasons. Seasons where people become obsessed with growth, discipline, learning, consistency. That focused energy creates momentum. Distraction weakens self-respect. Because deep down, you know when you are wasting your life. You know when you are procrastinating. You are avoiding growth. You are escaping responsibility. That awareness creates internal frustration. There was something painful about realizing you had enough time.
You just gave it away to distraction. That realization destroys many people internally, because wasted attention becomes wasted years. Focus creates identity. The ability to stay disciplined, to remain consistent, to ignore unnecessary noise, to protect your future. That ability creates powerful individuals. Most people cannot build momentum because distraction keeps resetting their mind. Every time focus begins building, another distraction appears, and eventually their life becomes fragmented. Deep work creates deep confidence, because every time you focus deeply, you prove I can control myself. That self-control creates self-respect. Distraction is modern self-destruction, not dramatic destruction, quiet destruction. The destruction of focus, discipline, patience, emotional control, without people noticing immediately. There are people whose dreams died because they could never stay focused long enough. That is tragic. Not because they lacked talent, because distraction kept stealing their future. The strongest people build environments that protect focus. They become intentional about what they consume, who they surround themselves with, how they spend time, what gets their attention. Because disciplined environments create disciplined minds. Your attention is valuable, extremely valuable. And the world profits from distracted people. Because distracted people consume more, think less, procrastinate more, build less. That is why protecting your focus matters deeply. Many people feel stuck, not because life trapped them, because distraction weakened their discipline. That distinction changes everything. Focus requires sacrifice. Sacrifice of endless entertainment, emotional escape, meaningless scrolling, constant stimulation. And weak versions of you resist that sacrifice constantly. There is something powerful about becoming fully focused on your future. Because now, your energy stops leaking everywhere. And concentrated energy creates transformation. Most people underestimate the psychological damage of constant distraction. Because distraction trains the brain to avoid difficulty quickly. And a mind trained to escape difficulty struggles to build greatness. Discipline means doing what matters, even when distractions feel easier. That is real self-control. The people who become extraordinary usually become obsessed with protecting their attention, protecting
Their focus, their routines, their emotional energy, their discipline. That protection creates momentum. Every distracted day weakens urgency slightly. And without urgency, potential fades. Because greatness requires intentional living, not accidental living. Most people are mentally overstimulated. Too much noise, scrolling, entertainment, information, comparison. And overstimulation weakens emotional clarity. Silence builds focus. Stillness builds awareness. Deep concentration builds discipline. That is why mentally strong people often protect solitude. You become emotionally stronger when you stop needing constant stimulation. Because now, your mind becomes calmer, sharper, more disciplined. That internal control creates power. Distraction destroys consistency quietly. People start many things, many goals, many routines. But distraction prevents completion. An unfinished effort weakens confidence. Confidence is built through completion.
Through consistency, focus, disciplined repetition. That process requires attention control. The strongest people often look obsessed to distracted people, because focused people move differently. They protect time, energy, attention, relentlessly. And that discipline creates different futures. You cannot build a meaningful life while constantly escaping into distraction. Because your future requires presence, attention, focus, discipline. Many people are addicted to easy dopamine, quick pleasure, instant stimulation. But easy dopamine weakens patience, and weak patience destroys consistency. Distraction steals more dreams than failure, because distracted people never stay focused long enough to fully build their potential. The strongest minds learn how to stay present, how to focus deeply, how to ignore unnecessary noise. That ability creates extraordinary emotional advantage. Your habits reveal your priorities. If distraction controls your life, your future eventually reflects that. But if discipline controls your habits, your future transforms differently. Most people are one focused year away from becoming completely different people. But distraction keeps interrupting transformation. You do not need to become perfect, but you must become intentional. Intentional with your time, your attention, your energy, your habits. Because intentional living creates powerful identities.
The strongest version of you is hidden behind focused discipline, behind deep work, emotional control, repeated concentration, protected attention. But distraction keeps blocking access to that version. Every moment you feed distraction, you weaken your future slightly. And every moment you protect focus, you strengthen your future slightly. That repetition shapes destiny. One day, you will realize your attention created your life. The question is, did you spend your attention building yourself or escaping yourself? There is one final truth in this chapter. Discipline and distraction cannot control your life at the same time. One builds your future. The other slowly destroys it. And the people who ultimately transform their lives are usually the people who finally learned how to protect their focus from everything trying to steal it.
Chapter 5. The person you could become is waiting. There is another version of you. A version most people around you have never met. A version that wakes up disciplined, thinks clearly, controls emotions, stays focused, keeps promises, moves with confidence, respects themselves deeply. That version of you exists. But right now, there is distance between who you are and who you could become. And that distance is built through habits, discipline, consistency, mindset, daily decisions. Let's slow this down. Most people never become who they were capable of becoming. Not because transformation was impossible, but because they stayed emotionally attached to weaker versions of themselves. Versions addicted to comfort, distraction, procrastination, emotional weakness, inconsistency. And slowly, potential dies quietly. The future version of you is not built accidentally. It is built intentionally, through repeated discipline, focus, emotional control, sacrifice, self-respect. That repetition creates identity. There are people listening to this right now who can feel it internally. They can feel they are meant for more. They are capable of more. They are wasting too much time. They are becoming less than they could be. And that realization creates frustration, because deep down, they know another version of themselves is possible. The strongest version of you is hidden behind difficult decisions. Decisions like waking up when you don't feel like it, staying disciplined when motivation disappears.
Protecting your focus, resisting distraction, controlling your emotions, continuing despite discomfort. That is how powerful identities are built. Transformation is painful because growth requires killing weak habits, confronting yourself honestly, letting go of emotional comfort, becoming disciplined consistently. And weak versions of you resist transformation constantly. Most people are emotionally loyal to the version of themselves that is destroying their future. Loyal to excuses, laziness, distraction, emotional escape, inconsistency, even while dreaming of a better life. That contradiction keeps them trapped. The person you could become is waiting behind consistency, waiting behind discipline, self-control, emotional strength, focus, repeated effort. But weak habits keep blocking access to that identity. Every disciplined action introduces you to your future self.
Every time you stay focused, resist distraction, keep promises to yourself, continue despite emotion, you strengthen that future identity. That process changes everything. Most people think transformation happens suddenly. Not true. Transformation happens quietly, day by day, choice by choice, habit by habit. That repetition slowly creates a completely different person. The strongest confidence comes from evidence. Evidence that you can trust yourself. You can stay disciplined. You can control your impulses. You can continue under pressure. That evidence creates self-respect. There is something painful about meeting people who became who you once dreamed of becoming. Because deep down, it forces confrontation. Confrontation with wasted time, weak habits, abandoned discipline, unrealized potential.
That realization hurts. Most people want transformation without changing identity. Impossible, because external growth follows internal change. The strongest version of you requires sacrifice. Sacrifice of comfort, distraction, emotional weakness, easy pleasure, inconsistency. And many people are unwilling to pay that price. There are moments where your future self is begging you internal, please stop delaying our life.
begging you to become disciplined, to stop procrastinating, to focus, to take your future seriously, to stop feeding weakness. But comfort keeps interrupting. Another layer. Your habits are either building your future self or destroying your future self. That process never stops. Every day matters.
Most people underestimate how powerful consistency becomes over time. One disciplined day seems small, but disciplined days repeated for years create extraordinary identities. That is the hidden power of repetition. The strongest people become obsessed with self-respect, because self-respect changes behavior. When you truly respect yourself, you stop wasting your life, betraying your future, feeding destructive habits, abandoning discipline casually. That mindset creates transformation. The person you could become is watching your decisions right now, watching what you tolerate, what controls your attention, whether you keep promises to yourself, whether you protect your future. And one day, that future self will either thank you or grieve who you never became.
Most people spend years trying to change results without changing habits. But habits create results. That is why identity matters more than temporary motivation. You become emotionally stronger every time you choose growth over comfort, discipline over distraction, responsibility over excuses. Those choices strengthen identity. There is a version of you that no longer procrastinates constantly, wastes hours scrolling, abandons discipline, lacks self-control, lives emotionally weak. But reaching that version requires war against your current habits. Weak habits create weak futures. This matters deeply because every repeated action trains identity. You train yourself to stay focused or to stay distracted, to become disciplined or to remain emotionally weak. That training shapes destiny. Most people never fully realize they were becoming their own limitation. Not because they lacked ability, because they lacked consistency. The strongest transformations happen privately, quietly.
When people finally decide, I refuse to keep becoming the weaker version of myself, that decision changes lives. Your future self is built through repetition, repeated focus, discipline, self-control, emotional maturity, responsibility. That repetition creates powerful people. There are people listening to this right now who are exhausted from restarting, exhausted from failing themselves, procrastinating, lacking consistency, living beneath their potential. And maybe they are finally realizing nobody is coming to save them. That realization creates urgency. The strongest version of you does not need perfect conditions. That version adapts under pressure, stays disciplined during difficult seasons, continues despite emotion. That emotional strength creates resilience. Many people wait for confidence before changing, but confidence is built after action, after repeated discipline, repeated consistency, repeated self-control. That process creates belief. You cannot become powerful while remaining emotionally attached to weakness. Weakness must be confronted, not protected. There is something psychologically freeing about finally becoming honest with yourself. Honest about your distractions, your excuses, your wasted time, your lack of discipline. Because honesty creates
transformation. The strongest people learn how to delay gratification, how to sacrifice temporary pleasure for long-term freedom. That ability creates extraordinary futures. The person you could become is hidden behind uncomfortable decisions, behind discipline, consistency, emotional control, sacrifice. And comfort keeps trying to stop you from reaching that version. Most people stay stuck because they keep repeating the same habits while expecting a different identity. Impossible. Identity changes through repeated behavior.
You become dangerous the moment you stop negotiating with weakness. The moment you decide, I refuse to waste my potential anymore. That decision creates momentum. One disciplined year can completely rebuild your life. Rebuild confidence, focus, self-respect, emotional strength, momentum. But transformation requires consistency. The strongest version of you already exists mentally, but it can only become reality through disciplined action repeated daily. There are moments where life changes forever, not because opportunity appeared, but because identity changed, because someone finally became disciplined, focused, emotionally strong, intentional. That shift changes destiny. Most people are one serious decision away from becoming unrecognizable. The decision to stop living like the weaker version of themselves. Your future self is waiting. Waiting for your discipline, for your focus, for your consistency, for your emotional growth. But every day you delay transformation, you delay becoming who you truly could be. The strongest people protect their future aggressively, protecting it from distraction, comfort, weak habits, emotional inconsistency. Because they understand their future depends on what they repeatedly practice. One day, you will meet the person your habits created. The question is, will that person look like discipline, focus, strength, self-respect? Or will that person look like excuses, distraction, inconsistency, wasted potential? Because your daily choices are building that answer right now. There is one final truth in this chapter. The person you could become is waiting. Waiting behind discipline, sacrifice, emotional strength, consistency. And the people who ultimately transform their lives are usually the people who finally decided, I refuse to die as the weaker version of myself.
Chapter 6. Self-sabotage happens quietly. Most people do not destroy their lives dramatically. They destroy themselves quietly, slowly, privately, through patterns nobody notices immediately. That is what makes self-sabotage dangerous. It rarely looks like disaster in the beginning. It looks ordinary. It looks like procrastination, distraction, inconsistency, emotional avoidance, comfort addiction, breaking promises to yourself repeatedly. And slowly, those small behaviors begin shaping identity. Let's slow this down. Self-sabotage is painful because deep down, you know you are doing it to yourself. Nobody forced the procrastination, the wasted time, the weak habits, the distractions, the emotional escape. You participated in your own destruction. That realization hurts. Many people are not failing because they are incapable.
They are failing because their habits are working against their future. That distinction changes everything, because now the problem is not lack of potential. The problem is lack of alignment. There are people listening to this right now who are secretly frustrated with themselves, not because life gave them nothing, but because they know they keep getting in their own way. They start, stop, restart, lose focus, lose discipline, repeat the cycle again. And slowly, self-respect begins collapsing internally. Self-sabotage often comes from emotional avoidance. People avoid difficult work, uncomfortable growth, responsibility, self-confrontation. So they escape instead into distraction, entertainment, scrolling, comfort, temporary pleasure. That escape becomes a habit. Weak habits always feel harmless initially. One more delay, one more excuse, one more distraction, one more broken promise. But repeated weakness compounds psychologically, and eventually, your habits begin introducing you to a version of yourself you no longer respect. Every time you betray yourself, your mind notices. Every time you quit too early, abandon discipline, procrastinate, avoid responsibility, you weaken trust internally. And without self-trust, confidence collapses. Confidence is not built through motivation alone. Confidence is built through evidence. Evidence that you can stay disciplined, you can remain focused, you can keep promises to yourself, you can continue despite discomfort. That evidence creates self-respect. Most people underestimate the emotional damage of repeated self-betrayal, because eventually they stop believing themselves. They say, "I'll change tomorrow. I'll become disciplined. I'll focus this time." But internally, their mind whispers, "You said that before." That internal conflict destroys momentum. Self-sabotage becomes addictive because avoidance gives temporary emotional relief. Relief from pressure, discomfort, responsibility, uncertainty. But temporary relief often creates long-term suffering. That is the hidden cost of weakness. The strongest people become brutally honest with themselves. Honest about their excuses, their distractions, their inconsistency, their emotional weakness. Because honesty creates transformation. Without honesty, self-destruction continues quietly. There is something painful about realizing you are becoming the reason your life feels stuck. Not your circumstances, not your past. You. Your habits, your mindset, your repeated choices. That realization hurts the ego. But it also creates power. Because now, you can finally change. Self-sabotage often hides behind comfort. People say, "I'm just resting. I'll start later. I need more motivation." But deep down, they are avoiding growth, avoiding discipline, avoiding discomfort. That avoidance delays transformation. Most people think self-destruction looks dramatic. Not always. Sometimes self-destruction looks like wasting years scrolling, never staying consistent, abandoning your potential quietly, living beneath your capability. That kind of destruction happens silently. The strongest version of you is constantly fighting the weaker version of you. One version wants growth, focus, discipline, emotional control, transformation. The other version wants comfort,
distraction, easy pleasure, emotional escape. And whichever version you feed repeatedly becomes stronger. Self-sabotage destroys urgency, and without urgency, potential fades, because people begin believing there's still time, until years disappear. There are people who could have changed their life completely, but never stayed disciplined long enough, not because transformation was impossible, because self-sabotage kept interrupting growth. The most dangerous habits are often invisible habits.
The most dangerous habits are often invisible habits. Invisible habits like negative self-talk, emotional avoidance, overthinking, constantly delaying action, making excuses internally. Those habits shape identity quietly. You become emotionally weaker every time you repeatedly surrender to distraction, laziness, emotional escape, inconsistency. That repetition conditions the mind. Self-control creates freedom, because once you control your habits, your impulses, your attention, your emotions, you stop becoming controlled by weakness. That ability creates power. Many people want a better future, while protecting the behaviors destroying that future. That contradiction keeps them trapped, because transformation requires sacrifice. Sacrifice of weak habits, emotional comfort, distraction, excuses. There is something psychologically exhausting about carrying unrealized potential, knowing you could become more, but repeatedly standing in your own way. That internal disappointment destroys peace. Most people do not need more information. They need more discipline. Because deep down, they already know what habits are hurting them, what distractions are stealing their future, what behaviors are keeping them weak. The issue is not awareness. The issue is execution. The strongest people become obsessed with alignment. Alignment between words, actions, standards, identity. Because alignment creates self-respect.
Self-sabotage often begins with small compromises. Compromises like, I'll do it tomorrow. One more distraction. One missed day doesn't matter. But repeated compromise weakens identity. Discipline is difficult initially, but self-destruction becomes far more painful eventually. That is what many people realize too late. You cannot become extraordinary while remaining emotionally attached to weakness. Weakness must be confronted, not protected. There are moments where your future self is begging you internally, please stop ruining our life. Begging you to focus, to become disciplined, to stop wasting time, to stop abandoning yourself. But weak habits keep interrupting. Most people sabotage themselves because they fear discomfort. But discomfort is where growth lives. Growth requires effort, repetition, emotional control, sacrifice. And weak versions of you resist those things constantly. The strongest transformations happen quietly. When people finally become tired of disappointing themselves, restarting constantly, procrastinating, lacking self-control. That frustration creates urgency, and urgency creates change.
Every disciplined action weakens self-sabotage. Every time you focus anyway, continue anyway, resist distraction anyway, keep promises to yourself anyway, you strengthen your identity. That repetition changes lives. The strongest people learn how to protect themselves from themselves. Protecting themselves from emotional weakness, laziness, distraction, self-destructive habits. That self-awareness creates advantage. There are people whose dreams never died from lack of talent. Their dreams died from repeated self-betrayal. That is tragic. Because potential without discipline becomes regret. Most people think transformation requires huge, dramatic changes. Not always. Sometimes transformation begins when you simply stop sabotaging yourself daily. That shift changes everything. You become dangerous the moment your habits finally begin supporting your future instead of destroying it. Because now, momentum builds. And momentum creates transformation. One disciplined year without constant self-sabotage can completely rebuild confidence, focus, self-respect, emotional strength, momentum. That is the hidden power of consistency. The strongest version of you already exists mentally, but weak habits keep blocking access to that identity. That is why discipline matters so deeply. Every day, you are either strengthening your future or sabotaging your future. That process never stops. Every habit matters. You cannot heal your life. You cannot heal your life while protecting the behaviors destroying your life. That contradiction keeps people trapped for years. There is something freeing about finally deciding, I refuse to keep becoming my own worst enemy. That decision creates transformation. Because now, you stop fighting against your own future and start building it instead. Most people are not truly trapped. They are simply trapped inside repeated patterns. Patterns of distraction, avoidance, inconsistency, emotional weakness. And patterns repeated long enough become identity. The strongest people break destructive patterns early, before weakness becomes personality. That awareness changes futures. One day, you will either thank yourself for becoming disciplined, or you will grieve the years you lost to self-sabotage. Because time keeps moving either way.
There is one final truth in this chapter. Self-sabotage happens quietly. Quietly through excuses, distraction, procrastination, emotional escape, repeated self-betrayal. And the people who ultimately transform their lives are usually the people who finally decided, I refuse to keep destroying my own future. Chapter 7. Nobody is stopping you but you. There comes a moment in life where excuses stop working. A moment where you finally realize nobody is truly holding you back except you. Not your past, not your circumstances, not other people. You. Your habits, your mindset, your decisions. And that realization is painful because now you must confront yourself honestly. Let's slow this down. Most people spend years blaming external things, blaming bad luck, lack of support, fear, timing, circumstances. But eventually, a deeper truth appears. Many people are not trapped externally. They are trapped internally, trapped by procrastination, emotional weakness, distraction, inconsistency, fear of discomfort, lack of discipline. That internal prison
destroys more futures than failure ever will. The hardest thing to accept is personal responsibility. Because responsibility removes excuses. It forces confrontation. Confrontation with wasted time, weak habits, self-sabotage, emotional avoidance. And many people spend their entire life avoiding that confrontation. There are people listening to this right now who know deep down their biggest obstacle is themselves. They know they waste too much time, they lack consistency, they procrastinate constantly, they abandon discipline too quickly, they keep betraying their future. And carrying that awareness becomes emotionally exhausting. Nobody can save you from yourself. This matters deeply. Nobody can build your discipline, fix your habits, control your focus, protect your future, force you to change. That responsibility belongs to you. And while that truth feels heavy, it is also freeing because it means you still have power. Most people want transformation without accountability. Impossible. Because growth begins the moment excuses end. There is something painful about realizing you had more control than you admitted. Control over your habits, your discipline, your attention, your emotional responses, your consistency. But admitting that truth hurts the ego. Because now, you can no longer blame the world for everything. Weak people stay emotionally attached to excuses. Excuses like, I'm not ready yet. I'll start tomorrow. I need more motivation. Life is unfair. Maybe later. And slowly, excuses become identity. Excuses feel comforting temporarily, but they destroy futures permanently. Because excuses delay growth, discipline, urgency, transformation. And delayed growth becomes regret. The strongest people become brutally honest with themselves. They ask, where am I being weak? What habits are hurting me? What excuses am I hiding behind? What must change? That honesty creates transformation. Most people know exactly what is destroying their life. They know the distractions, the weak habits, the lack of focus, the emotional inconsistency. But awareness without action changes nothing. That is why execution matters. There are moments where your future self is begging you internally, please stop making excuses. Begging you to become disciplined, to stop wasting time, to take responsibility, to stop running from growth. But weak habits keep interrupting. The scariest thing about excuses is that they sound reasonable. That is what makes them dangerous. Because people convince themselves, I'll change later. I still have time. It's not that serious. Until years disappear. Nobody is stopping you from becoming disciplined, waking up earlier, protecting your focus, improving your habits, strengthening your mindset. But weak versions of you resist those things constantly. Your future changes the moment you stop waiting for rescue. Because rescue mentality creates passivity, and passive people rarely transform their lives for real. The strongest people stop asking, who will save me? And begin asking, how do I rebuild myself? That shift changes identity. Most people are not destroyed by lack of opportunity. They are destroyed by lack of self-control. That distinction matters deeply Because once you control your habits, your emotions, your focus, your discipline, your future changes dramatically. There is something psychologically freeing about taking ownership of your life completely. Because now, you stop wasting energy blaming everything externally and begin directing energy toward growth instead. Responsibility creates power. Victim mentality creates weakness. Because responsibility says, I can change this. Victim mentality says, I am powerless. And mindset shapes behavior.
Many people secretly wait for perfect timing, perfect motivation, perfect confidence. But transformation belongs to people who act before they feel ready. That courage creates momentum. Nobody is coming to magically transform your life. Nobody is coming to hand you discipline, focus, emotional strength, consistency, self-respect. Those things are built, painfully sometimes, quietly often, but built through repeated action. The strongest people become obsessed with responsibility. Not because responsibility feels easy, because responsibility creates freedom. Freedom from excuses, weakness, self-sabotage, emotional chaos. That freedom changes lives. You become dangerous. The moment you stop blaming the world and start rebuilding yourself instead. Because now, your energy becomes productive. And productive energy creates transformation. Most people overestimate external obstacles and underestimate internal obstacles. But internal weakness destroys more potential than external difficulty ever will. You cannot become powerful while remaining emotionally loyal to excuses. Excuses protect weakness. Responsibility creates growth. That distinction changes everything. There are people whose life never changed because they kept waiting for motivation, inspiration, rescue, confidence. But powerful lives are built through action, not waiting. Every day, you are either building yourself or delaying yourself. That process never stops. Every habit matters. The strongest version of you requires uncomfortable responsibility. Responsibility for your habits, your mindset, your discipline, your future. And weak versions of you resist responsibility constantly. Many people stay stuck because excuses protect their ego, because excuses prevent confrontation. But growth requires confrontation. Confrontation with laziness, inconsistency, distraction, emotional weakness. That honesty creates transformation. The people who ultimately change their life usually become tired of hearing their own excuses, tired of procrastinating, restarting, wasting years, living beneath their potential. That frustration creates urgency, and urgency creates movement. You become emotionally stronger every time you choose responsibility over excuses, discipline over comfort, focus over distraction. Those small victories strengthen identity. Nobody can fight the internal war for you. Nobody can force your consistency, build your habits, control your attention, save your future. That battle belongs to you alone.
The strongest confidence comes from self-respect. And self-respect is built when your actions align with your goals.
That alignment creates peace internally. There is something powerful about becoming the type of person who no longer hides behind excuses. Because now, your growth becomes real. Most people are capable of far more than they realize. But capability means nothing without responsibility. Potential without discipline becomes regret. The strongest people stop waiting for life to become easier and begin building themselves stronger instead. That mindset creates resilience. Every excuse costs something. Costs time, momentum, discipline, growth, future opportunities, and repeated excuses create painful identities. One disciplined year without excuses can completely rebuild confidence, focus, emotional strength, self-respect, momentum. That is the power of ownership. You are not powerless. You are not trapped permanently. But transformation requires responsibility. Because nobody can become disciplined for you. The strongest version of you is waiting behind accountability. Waiting behind discipline, honesty, consistency, emotional control. But excuses keep delaying access to that version. One day, you will either thank yourself for taking responsibility, or you will regret the years you lost blaming everything except yourself. Because time keeps moving either way. The real battle was never you versus the world. The real battle was you versus your excuses. And whichever side wins shapes your future. There is one final truth in this chapter. Nobody is stopping you, but you. Not your circumstances, not your past, not other people. You. Your habits, your mindset, your discipline. And the people who ultimately transform their lives are usually the people who finally decided, I refuse to stand in my own way anymore.
Chapter 8. Your habits are building your identity. Every single day, you are becoming someone. Not someday, not in the future, right now. Through your habits, through your routines, through the things you repeatedly tolerate. That is the dangerous truth most people ignore. Your habits are building your identity. Let's slow this down. Most people focus too much on goals, but goals do not shape identity alone. Habits do. Because goals are temporary moments. Habits are repeated behavior. And repeated behavior becomes personality. You do not suddenly become disciplined. You practice discipline daily. You do not suddenly become mentally strong. You practice mental strength daily. You do not suddenly become weak either. Weakness is practiced too. Through procrastination, distraction, emotional avoidance, laziness, inconsistency. That repetition shapes identity quietly. There are people listening to this right now who are frustrated with their life while repeating the same habits every day. The same distractions, excuses, routines, emotional patterns, and then wondering, why am I still stuck? But identity does not change without behavioral change. Your habits are training your mind constantly. Every repeated action teaches your brain, this is who we are. That is why repeated behavior matters so deeply.
Because eventually, your habits stop feeling like actions they start feeling like identity. A person who repeatedly avoids discomfort, procrastinates, wastes time, lacks discipline, eventually begins identifying as lazy, inconsistent, weak, incapable. Not because they were born that way, because repetition created conditioning. Habits are psychological votes. Every action is a vote for the stronger version of you or the weaker version of you. Every time you stay disciplined, focus deeply, keep promises to yourself, continue despite discomfort, you strengthen your identity. And every time you avoid growth, surrender to distraction, abandon consistency, feed weak habits, you weaken it. Most people underestimate how dangerous small habits become over time.
Because small habits compound. 1 hour wasted daily becomes years. One weak decision repeated constantly becomes personality. And eventually, your habits create a life you never intended to build. The strongest people are obsessed with routine. Not because routine feels exciting, because routine creates identity, and identity shapes destiny. There are moments where your future is shaped by ordinary decisions. Decisions like getting up anyway, staying focused anyway, resisting distraction anyway, remaining disciplined anyway. Those moments look small externally, but internally, identity is changing. Most people think transformation requires huge, dramatic change. Not always. Sometimes, transformation begins with changing one repeated habit. Because one changed habit changes focus, discipline, confidence.
That process creates transformation. Your habits determine how you think, how you feel, how you respond to pressure, how much you trust yourself. That is why habits matter psychologically. Self-respect is built through repeated behavior. Every time you keep promises to yourself, stay disciplined, protect your focus, remain consistent, your mind learns, I can trust myself. That trust creates confidence. Weak habits create emotional weakness. This matters deeply because habits shape emotional resilience too. A person addicted to comfort, distraction, emotional escape struggles under pressure because weak habits train weak responses. Strong habits create emotional stability. Habits like discipline, focus, consistency, self-control, accountability. Those behaviors strengthen identity over time. There are people whose future is quietly collapsing because their habits are destroying them daily. Not dramatically, quietly, through wasted time, lack of focus, emotional inconsistency, distraction addiction. That repetition becomes dangerous. You cannot separate your habits from your future because your future is built through repeated behavior.
That is why temporary actions matter more than people realize. The strongest transformations happen privately, quietly. When people become intentional about what they repeat, what they consume, what controls their attention, how they spend time. That intentionality creates powerful identities. Most people wait until they feel different before changing habits. But habits create feelings, not the other way around. Action creates identity.
Repeated action creates belief. There is something painful about realizing your habits created the life you currently have. That realization hurts because now you must take responsibility. Every habit either strengthens your future or weakens your future. There is no neutral repetition. Every repeated action shapes identity. The strongest people become highly protective of their habits because they understand habits are life architecture. Daily behavior builds destiny. Many people sabotage themselves through unconscious repetition, repeating negative thinking, procrastination, emotional escape, lack of discipline. And eventually, those repeated behaviors become automatic. That is why intentional living matters. Discipline is not one decision. It is repeated decisions. Repeated focus, effort, emotional control, self-respect. That repetition creates mentally strong people. You become emotionally stronger every time you repeat disciplined behavior. Because repetition trains the mind. We do difficult things. That conditioning creates resilience. Most people are not trapped by fate. They are trapped by repeated patterns. Patterns of distraction, laziness, emotional inconsistency, self-sabotage. And repeated patterns become identity. The strongest version of you already exists mentally, but your habits determine whether that version becomes reality. That is why daily behavior matters so deeply. There are moments where your future self is begging you internally, please change your habits. Begging you to become disciplined, to stop wasting time, to protect your attention, to stay consistent, because your future depends on repetition. Most people focus on outcomes. Strong people focus on systems, because systems create habits, and habits create identity. A disciplined life is not built accidentally. It is built intentionally through repeated routines, standards, focus, accountability. That process creates transformation. Every time you repeat a weak habit, you strengthen the weaker version of yourself. And every time you repeat a strong habit, you strengthen the stronger version. That war never stops. There is something psychologically powerful about becoming consistent, because consistency creates confidence, momentum, emotional stability, self-respect. That is why disciplined people move differently. Most people are one changed routine away from changing their life, but weak habits keep interrupting transformation. You do not rise to your goals. You fall to your systems. And your systems are built through habits. That is why habits matter more than motivation. Motivation disappears. Emotion changes. But habits remain.
That is why emotionally strong people build routines. Because routines survive emotional chaos better than feelings do. The strongest people make discipline automatic, not emotional, automatic. They remove negotiation from important habits. That mindset creates powerful identities. You become what you repeatedly practice. If you practice focus, discipline, self-control, consistency, you become stronger. If you practice distraction, excuses, laziness, emotional escape, you become weaker. That repetition shapes destiny. Most people think identity is fixed. Not true. Identity evolves through behavior. Repeated behavior changes self-perception. That is why disciplined action matters psychologically.
There were people whose confidence disappeared because their habits repeatedly taught them you cannot trust yourself. That internal conditioning destroys self-belief. The strongest confidence comes from evidence. Evidence built through disciplined habits, consistent effort, repeated self-control. That evidence creates deep internal trust. One disciplined habit repeated daily can completely rebuild your life. Rebuild confidence, focus, emotional strength, momentum, self-respect. That is the hidden power of repetition. The strongest people become intentional about mornings, routines, focus, environment, discipline, because they understand identity is built daily.
Your future self is watching your habits right now, watching what you repeat, what you tolerate, what controls your attention, whether discipline is becoming identity. And one day, that future self will either thank you or suffer from your repeated weakness. Every day, your habits are casting votes for the person you are becoming or the person you are destroying. That process never stops. Most people want transformation, but refuse to change the habits creating their current reality. Impossible, because different identity requires different behavior. The strongest transformations happen when people finally become tired of their own patterns, tired of procrastination, distraction, inconsistency, emotional weakness. That frustration creates urgency, and urgency creates behavioral change. You are not your past habits permanently, but you will become your repeated future habits. That distinction changes everything. One day, you will meet the person your habits created. The question is, will that person make you proud or remind you of everything you failed to change? Because your daily behavior is shaping that answer right now. Your future self is watching your habits right now, watching what you repeat, what you tolerate, what controls your attention, whether discipline is becoming identity. And one day, that future self will either thank you or suffer from your repeated weakness. Every day, your habits are casting votes for the person you are becoming or the person you are destroying. That process never stops. Most people want transformation, but refuse to change the habits creating their current reality. Impossible, because different identity requires different behavior. The strongest transformations happen when people finally become tired of their own patterns, tired of procrastination, distraction, inconsistency, emotional weakness. That frustration creates urgency, and urgency creates behavioral change. You are not your past habits permanently, but you will become your repeated future habits. That distinction changes everything. One day, you will meet the person your habits created. The question is, will that person make you proud or remind you of everything you failed to change? Because your daily behavior is shaping that answer right now.
There is one final truth in this chapter. Your habits are building your identity. Quietly, daily, repeatedly. And the people who ultimately transform their lives are usually the people who finally understood. Small, repeated actions create powerful futures. Chapter 9. You must kill the weak version of yourself. There's a version of you that is destroying your future. A version that procrastinates, avoids discomfort, makes excuses, wastes time, lacks discipline, runs from responsibility, chooses comfort over growth. And if you are honest with yourself,
You already know that version exists. The problem is, most people protect that version of themselves. Feed it. Excuse it. Defend it. And slowly, that weaker identity takes control of their life. Let's slow this down. Transformation is not only about building better habits, it is also about destroying destructive identity. Because you cannot become stronger while continuing to feed weakness daily. That is the painful truth. Many people say they want a better life, but they still protect lazy habits, emotional weakness, distraction addiction, inconsistency, self-sabotage. That contradiction keeps them trapped. Because the stronger version of you cannot fully exist while the weaker version still controls your decisions. There are people listening to this right now who are exhausted from fighting themselves internally, exhausted from restarting, procrastinating, lacking self-control, wasting potential, disappointing themselves repeatedly. And deep down, they know exactly what is destroying them. But knowing is not enough. Weakness must be confronted. The weak version of you always wants comfort, always wants easy pleasure, emotional escape, convenience, distraction, avoidance. Because weakness hates discomfort, and growth always requires discomfort. Every time you procrastinate, avoid responsibility, surrender to distraction, break promises to yourself, you feed the weaker version of yourself. You strengthen it. You train it. And repeated weakness becomes identity. Most people do not realize their habits are protecting weakness. Every excuse, every delay, every moment of avoidance.
All of it keeps the weaker identity alive. That is why transformation feels painful, because part of you must die. Not physically, mentally, emotionally, behaviorally. The disciplined version of you cannot fully emerge until the weak version loses power. That requires sacrifice. Sacrifice of excuses, laziness, distraction, emotional comfort, victim mentality. And weak people resist sacrifice constantly. There is something painful about realizing you became emotionally attached to your own weakness, attached to comfort, excuses, procrastination, emotional escape, even while dreaming about a better future. That contradiction destroys momentum. The strongest people become ruthless with weakness. Not cool, ruthless. They stop tolerating
Self-sabotage, endless excuses, wasted time, emotional inconsistency. Because they understand weakness compounds. You cannot negotiate with the habits destroying your future. This matters deeply because every time you make peace with weakness, weakness grows stronger. Most people try to improve their life without confronting the identity ruining their life. Impossible. Because behavior follows identity, and identity must change for transformation to happen. The weak version of you always whispers, tomorrow, later, rest first. This is too hard. One more distraction won't matter. And slowly, those whispers destroy years. There are moments where your future self is begging you internally,
please stop feeding weakness, begging you to become disciplined, to stop wasting time, to control your impulses, to take your future seriously. Because your future depends on which version of you wins. Every disciplined action weakens the weaker version of you. Every time you focus anyway, continue anyway, stay disciplined anyway, resist distraction anyway, you strengthen the stronger identity. That repetition changes lives. Most people think confidence appears first. Not true. Confidence appears after repeated self-conquest. After repeatedly defeating laziness, distraction, excuses, emotional weakness. That victory creates self-respect. Weakness is seductive because weakness offers comfort, immediate pleasure, easy escape.
But weakness always charges a price later. A painful price. The price of regret, wasted potential, emotional frustration, unrealized identity. The strongest people become addicted to growth instead of comfort. Because they understand comfort weakens them. Growth strengthens them. That mindset changes everything. Killing the weak version of yourself requires painful honesty. Honesty about your habits, your distractions, your emotional patterns, your excuses. Because transformation begins where denial ends. Most people are not weak permanently. They are simply practicing weakness repeatedly. And repeated behavior creates identity. That means different repetition can create different identity too. You become mentally stronger
Every time you do difficult things voluntarily, because discomfort trains resilience. That is why disciplined people become emotionally powerful over time. Weakness grows in environments of comfort, distraction, laziness, emotional escape. That is why your environment matters deeply, because environment influences identity. The strongest transformations happen privately, quietly, when people finally become tired of disappointing themselves, abandoning their future, restarting constantly, living beneath their potential. That frustration creates urgency, and urgency creates transformation. The weak version of you fears discipline, because discipline removes excuses, removes comfort, removes emotional escape. And weakness depends on those things to survive. Every habit either strengthens discipline or strengthens weakness. That process never stops. Every day you are feeding something. Most people stay trapped because they keep protecting behaviors that should have been destroyed long ago. Behaviors like procrastination, distraction addiction, emotional inconsistency, lack of self-control. That protection delays transformation. The strongest people stop identifying with weakness. They stop saying, "This is just who I am. I've always been this way. I can't change." Because identity can evolve through repeated, disciplined action. There is something psychologically powerful about becoming the type of person who no longer tolerates weakness inside themselves. Because now, growth becomes non-negotiable. The weak version of you always chooses short-term comfort. The stronger version chooses long-term freedom. That is the war happening inside your mind daily. Most people think discipline is punishment, but discipline is actually liberation. Liberation from self-sabotage,
distraction, emotional weakness, regret. That is why disciplined people often become calmer internally. You cannot become extraordinary while protecting ordinary habits, because extraordinary lives require extraordinary standards. Every difficult decision you make kills weakness slightly. Every time you wake up early, focus deeply, stay disciplined, resist emotional escape, you weaken the old identity. That repetition creates transformation. The strongest version of you is hidden behind discomfort, hidden behind sacrifice.
Lack of self-control? That protection delays transformation. The strongest people stop identifying with weakness. They stop saying, "This is just who I am. I've always been this way. I can't change." Because identity can evolve through repeated, disciplined action. There is something psychologically powerful about becoming the type of person who no longer tolerates weakness inside themselves. Because now, growth becomes non-negotiable. The weak version of you always chooses short-term comfort. The stronger version chooses long-term freedom. That is the war happening inside your mind daily. Most people think discipline is punishment, but discipline is actually liberation. Liberation from self-sabotage, distraction, emotional weakness, regret. That is why disciplined people often become calmer internally. You cannot become extraordinary while protecting ordinary habits, because extraordinary lives require extraordinary standards. Every difficult decision you make kills weakness slightly. Every time you wake up early, focus deeply, stay disciplined, resist emotional escape, you weaken the old identity. That repetition creates transformation. The strongest version of you is hidden behind discomfort, hidden behind sacrifice. Discipline, emotional control, consistency. And weak habits keep trying to block access to that identity. Many people never meet their full potential because they never fully declared war against their weaker self. They tried to manage weakness, but weakness grows when tolerated. There are moments where life changes forever, not because opportunity appeared, but because someone finally became tired of their own excuses. That exhaustion creates transformation. The strongest people become obsessed with self-respect, because self-respect changes behavior. When you truly respect yourself, you stop wasting your life, feeding weakness, abandoning discipline, tolerating self-sabotage. That mindset creates powerful futures. You are not doomed to remain the current version of yourself. But transformation requires death. The death of weak habits, weak thinking, weak standards, weak routines. That process is uncomfortable, but necessary. Most people are one serious decision away from becoming unrecognizable. The decision to stop feeding the weaker version of themselves. Every day, you are either strengthening discipline or strengthening weakness. That process never pauses. Every habit matters. One disciplined year where you stop tolerating weakness can completely rebuild confidence, focus, self-respect, emotional strength, identity. That is the power of self-conquest. The strongest people are not people without weakness. They are people who stopped allowing weakness to control them completely. That distinction changes destiny. Your future self is watching your decisions right now, watching what you tolerate, what habits you repeat, whether weakness still controls your behavior. And one day, that future self will either thank you or suffer from the version of yourself you refused to confront. Transformation begins the moment you stop protecting weakness. The moment you finally decide, I refuse to keep becoming my own limitation. That decision changes identity. One day, you will meet the person your habits created. The question is, will that person look disciplined, focused, emotionally strong, self-respecting? Or will that person still look controlled by comfort, excuses, distraction, emotional weakness? Because your current decisions are building that answer right now. There is one final truth in this chapter. You must kill the weak version of yourself. Not through hate, but through discipline, through consistency, through self-respect, through repeated decisions that strengthen the better version of you. And the people who ultimately transform their lives are usually the people who finally decided, I refuse to let weakness control my future anymore. Chapter 10. Become someone you respect. There is a different kind of pain. The pain of looking at yourself and knowing you are not becoming the person you were meant to be. Not because life gave you nothing. Not because you lacked potential. But because somewhere along the way, you stopped respecting yourself. You started breaking promises to yourself, tolerating weak habits, abandoning discipline, wasting your time, choosing comfort over growth, and slowly, your identity weakened. Let's slow this down. Most people think self-respect is confidence. Not exactly. Self-respect is deeper. Self-respect is how you treat your own future. It is the relationship you have with yourself internally. And that relationship is shaped through behavior. You cannot fully respect yourself while constantly betraying yourself. Impossible. Because your mind notices every excuse, every delay, every broken promise, every act of self-sabotage. And repeated self-betrayal weakens identity. There are people listening to this right now who feel disconnected from themselves internally, not because they are incapable, but because they no longer trust themselves fully. They promised themselves they would become disciplined, they would focus, they would change, they would stop wasting time. But repeated inconsistency destroyed self-trust. And without self-trust, confidence collapses. The strongest confidence is earned confidence. Confidence built through discipline, consistency, emotional control, repeated self-respect. That kind of confidence feels different because it is rooted in evidence. Most people want to feel proud of themselves without doing proud things consistently. Impossible. Because pride is built through action, through discipline, responsibility, growth, integrity. That repetition creates self-respect. Becoming someone you respect requires difficult choices. Choices like staying disciplined when nobody is watching, continuing when motivation disappears, resisting distraction, protecting your future, controlling emotional impulses. Those choices shape identity. There is something painful about secretly disappointing yourself every day, knowing you could focus more, you could become stronger, you could stop wasting your life, you could become disciplined, but continuing weak habits anyway. That internal conflict destroys peace. Most people are not emotionally exhausted from work. They are emotionally exhausted from self-betrayal, from constantly becoming less than they know they could be. That psychological weight becomes heavy over time. Self-respect changes behavior. When you genuinely respect yourself, you stop tolerating weak habits, wasting time carelessly, feeding distractions constantly, abandoning discipline casually, because your future becomes valuable to you. The strongest people protect their standards aggressively, because standards shape identity, and identity shapes destiny. There are moments where your future self is begging you internally, please become someone we can be proud of, begging you to become disciplined, to stop procrastinating, to take your life seriously, to stop feeding weakness. Because your future depends on who you become internally. Self-respect is built privately, during moments where nobody is watching, nobody is forcing you, nobody is praising you, and you still choose discipline anyway. That behavior creates integrity. Integrity matters deeply, because integrity means your actions match your standards. And people who lose integrity internally lose confidence eventually too. Most people want external validation, but lack internal validation. And no amount of praise fixes self-betrayal, lack of discipline, emotional weakness, inconsistency. Because deep down, you know whether you respect yourself. The strongest transformations happen when people become tired of disappointing themselves, tired of restarting, procrastinating, lacking self-control, abandoning their standards. That frustration creates urgency. And urgency creates change. You become emotionally stronger every time you choose discipline over comfort, responsibility over excuses, growth over distraction. Those repeated decisions build identity. There is something powerful about becoming reliable to yourself, reliable enough to keep promises, to stay disciplined, to continue despite emotion, to protect your future. That reliability creates deep confidence. The strongest people do not always feel motivated, but they developed standards strong enough to survive temporary emotion. That emotional stability creates powerful identities. Most people underestimate how much self-respect affects mental health. Because when you continuously waste your potential, avoid responsibility, betray your standards, internal frustration grows. That frustration destroys peace slowly. You cannot hate yourself into transformation, but you can discipline yourself into self-respect. That distinction matters deeply, because real growth is not built through self-hatred. It is built through responsibility. The strongest version of you already exists mentally. A version that wakes up focused, controls emotions, stays disciplined, protects attention, respects itself deeply. But weak habits keep blocking access to that identity. Every disciplined habit sends a message internally. I matter enough to protect my future. That mindset changes behavior. Most people seek confidence externally, through approval, validation, attention, recognition. But real confidence is internal, built through repeated self-respect. There are people with money, status, success, who still do not respect themselves internally, because achievement cannot replace integrity. Self-respect is not built through perfection. It is built through alignment. Alignment between goals, actions, standards, habits. That alignment creates peace internally. The strongest people become intentional about routines, focus, discipline, emotional control. Because intentional living creates intentional identity. There is something psychologically powerful about looking in the mirror and knowing you are finally becoming someone you admire. That feeling changes everything. Weak habits weaken identity. Strong habits strengthen identity. That process never stops. Every repeated behavior shapes confidence, discipline, emotional strength, self-respect. Most people want better lives, but still tolerate behaviors that destroy self-respect. Behaviors like procrastination, distraction addiction, laziness, emotional inconsistency. That contradiction keeps them trapped.
You become dangerous the moment you stop accepting weakness from yourself casually. Because now, growth becomes your standard. The strongest confidence comes from evidence. Evidence that you survived difficult seasons. You stayed disciplined. You controlled yourself. You kept promises to yourself. That evidence creates deep internal trust. Self-respect requires sacrifice. Sacrifice of excuses, comfort addiction, emotional escape, weak routines. Because disciplined identity requires intentional behavior. Most people are one disciplined year away from becoming completely different people. Different mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. But transformation requires consistency. The people who truly respect themselves protect their focus, their future, their habits, their peace, their standards. Because they understand their identity is fragile without discipline. One of the saddest things in life is becoming someone you secretly do not admire. Someone who keeps quitting, keeps procrastinating, keeps wasting time, keeps abandoning growth. That internal disappointment destroys confidence quietly. You deserve to become someone you are proud of, not through fantasy, through action, through discipline, consistency, emotional control, self-respect. That repetition creates transformation. Every day, you are either becoming someone you respect or becoming someone you continue apologizing for. That process never pauses. Every habit matters. The strongest people stop negotiating with weakness. They stop asking, "Do I feel like it?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming through this behavior?" That shift changes identity. There are moments where your life changes forever, not because circumstances changed, but because your standards changed. Because you finally decided, "I refuse to keep disrespecting my own future." That decision creates transformation. You cannot build a powerful life while remaining emotionally attached to weak behavior. Weak behavior creates weak identity
and weak identity struggles under pressure. The strongest version of you is waiting behind discipline, integrity, emotional strength, consistency.
But weak habits keep delaying access to that person. One day, you will meet the person your habits created. The question is, will you respect that person? Will you admire their discipline, their mindset, their standards, their emotional strength? Or will you grieve the version of yourself you failed to become? Because your daily decisions are shaping that answer right now. There is one final truth in this chapter. Becoming someone you respect changes everything. Because once you truly respect yourself, you stop wasting your life, feeding weakness, abandoning discipline, betraying your future.
And the people who ultimately transform their lives are usually the people who finally decided, I refuse to become someone I cannot respect anymore. One day, you will meet yourself. One day, you will meet yourself. Not the version of you that existed in your imagination. Not the version built from excuses. Not the version that said, I'll start tomorrow. You will meet the version your habits created. The version built through discipline, consistency, focus, emotional control, repeated daily decisions. Or the version destroyed through distraction, procrastination, comfort addiction, self-sabotage, emotional weakness. That meeting is coming for everyone. Let's slow this down one final time. Most people spend years fighting external battles, trying to defeat circumstances, fear, rejection, pressure. But the greatest battle was always internal. The war between comfort and growth,
Discipline and distraction, excuses and responsibility, weakness and transformation. That war shaped everything. There are two versions of you living inside your mind right now. One version wants peace, discipline, growth, confidence, self-respect, transformation. The other version wants comfort, emotional escape, distraction, easy pleasure, avoidance. And every day, one version grows stronger. Based on your repeated choices, there are people listening to this right now who already know they are capable of more. They know they could become stronger, they could become disciplined, they could stop wasting time, they could rebuild their identity. But knowing is not enough, because transformation belongs to people who act. Most people never become who they could have been, not because they lacked potential, but because they kept feeding the weaker version of themselves, feeding excuses, laziness, distraction, inconsistency, emotional weakness. And slowly, weakness became identity. The scariest thing in life is not failure. It is reaching the end of your life still wondering, who could I have become? That question destroys people internally. Because deep down, most people know when they wasted their own potential. You were not born to spend your life distracted, emotionally weak, inconsistent, controlled by comfort. There is more inside you than that. More discipline, more focus, more resilience, more strength. But strength must be developed. The strongest people are not people without weakness. They are people who stopped allowing weakness to control them completely. That distinction changes everything, because self-mastery changes destiny. Every disciplined action matters. Every time you focus anyway, continue anyway, wake up anyway, resist distraction anyway, you strengthen identity. That repetition creates transformation. Most people underestimate how much their daily behavior shapes their future. But identity is built through repetition. Repeated habits, routines, thoughts, standards, decisions. That repetition creates the person you eventually become. There is something powerful about becoming someone you can trust internally. Someone who keeps promises, stays disciplined, controls emotions, protects their future, continues despite discomfort. That self-trust creates confidence. Real confidence.
The strongest confidence is not loud. It is quiet, built through evidence. Evidence that you survived. You stayed disciplined. You rebuilt yourself. You defeated weaker habits. That evidence creates self-respect. Nobody is coming to save you from yourself. Nobody can build your discipline, fix your habits, control your focus, create your future. That responsibility belongs to you. And while that truth feels heavy, it is also freedom, because it means you still have power. The strongest transformations happen privately, quietly. When people finally decide, I refuse to keep becoming the weaker version of myself. That decision changes lives. There will be days where discipline feels difficult. Motivation disappears. Pressure feels heavy. Emotional exhaustion appears. But those are the days that shape identity most. Because difficult days reveal who controls your future. Weakness always wants immediate comfort, but strength chooses long-term freedom. That is the war happening inside your mind daily. Every excuse costs something. Every distraction costs something. Every moment of self-betrayal costs something. The cost may not appear immediately, but over time, weak habits create painful futures. The strongest people become intentional about what they repeat, what they tolerate, what controls their attention, who they are becoming. Because intentional behavior creates intentional identity. You cannot build a powerful future while feeding destructive habits daily. Impossible. Because habits become personality, and personality shapes destiny. Most people wait too long to take themselves seriously, too long to become disciplined, focus deeply, protect their future, rebuild themselves. And eventually, time exposes the consequences of weak habits. Your future self is watching you right now, watching how you respond to pressure, how you handle distraction, whether you keep promises to yourself, whether you protect your potential. And one day, that future self will either thank you or mourn the years you wasted. There is something dangerous about a person who finally masters themselves, because now they stop becoming controlled by impulses, distractions, emotional weakness, excuses, and self-control creates power. Most people want extraordinary lives while protecting ordinary habits. Impossible, because extraordinary lives require extraordinary discipline, extraordinary consistency, extraordinary self-control.
One disciplined year can completely rebuild confidence, focus, emotional strength, identity, self-respect. That is the hidden power of consistency. You are not trapped permanently. You are not doomed permanently. But transformation requires responsibility because nobody can fight your internal war for you. The strongest version of you is still possible, still waiting behind discipline, consistency, emotional control, focused action. But weak habits keep delaying access to that version. Every day, you are either becoming stronger or becoming weaker. That process never pauses. Every habit matters. The greatest battle of your life will never happen publicly. It will happen privately, inside your mind, during moments where nobody is watching, nobody is forcing you, nobody is saving you, and you must decide who controls your future.
One disciplined year can completely rebuild confidence, focus, emotional strength, identity, self-respect. That is the hidden power of consistency. You are not trapped permanently. You are not doomed permanently. But transformation requires responsibility because nobody can fight your internal war for you. The strongest version of you is still possible, still waiting behind discipline, consistency, emotional control, focused action. But weak habits keep delaying access to that version. Every day, you are either becoming stronger or becoming weaker. That process never pauses. Every habit matters. The greatest battle of your life will never happen publicly. It will happen privately, inside your mind, during moments where nobody is watching, nobody is forcing you, nobody is saving you, and you must decide who controls your future. Most people lose the war internally before life defeats them externally. That is why mindset matters so deeply. Because mindset shapes behavior, discipline, resilience, identity. There are moments where your life changes forever. Not because circumstances changed, but because you finally changed. Because you finally decided, I refuse to stay this version of myself anymore. That decision changes destiny. One day, you will look back at this season of your life, and you will either thank yourself for becoming disciplined, or you will grieve the version of yourself you never became. Because time keeps moving either way. The strongest people are not perfect people. They are people who continued despite discomfort, stayed disciplined despite emotion, rebuilt themselves after failure, refused to surrender to weakness. That resilience creates transformation. Your future is not created through intention alone. It is created through repeated action, repeated discipline, repeated self-respect. That repetition builds identity. There is still time to rebuild yourself. Still time to become disciplined, protect your focus, strengthen your habits, change your identity. But transformation requires action. Not wishing, not waiting. Action. The version of you that you admire most already exists as potential. But potential means nothing without discipline. Potential without execution becomes regret. Another layer. The strongest thing you can do is stop running from yourself. Stop avoiding responsibility.
discomfort, discipline, growth, and finally become intentional about who you are becoming. One day, you will meet yourself, the real version, the version your habits created, the version built from discipline or excuses, focus or distraction, consistency or self-sabotage. And that meeting will reveal everything. There is one final truth in this audiobook. The battle was never you versus other people. The battle was always you versus you. And the people who ultimately transform their lives are usually the people who finally decided, no matter how difficult this becomes, I refuse to let the weaker version of myself win.
If this message spoke to you, share it, subscribe, keep listening. This is Beyond the Noise Studio.